When we observe Confederate History Month, we would do well to ask ourselves what that means and why we do it. Despite what our opponents would have us believe about Confederate motives, it is best to examine what Confederates themselves said at the time. At the beginning of the war, the Virginia Secession Declaration stated, quote, "The people of Virginia, in their ratification of the Constitution, declared that the powers granted were derived from the people of the United States, and might be resumed whensoever the same should be perverted to their injury and oppression. That the federal government, having perverted said powers, not only to the injury of the people of Virginia, but to the oppression of the southern slaveholding states, now we, the people of Virginia, do declare and ordain that the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed, that the Union is hereby dissolved, and that the state of Virginia is in full possession of all the rights of sovereignty." That was the only reason Virginia gave for leaving the Union. The powers that the people of Virginia had delegated to the federal government had been perverted, and the people of Virginia had the sovereign right to recall them and become independent once again. The Union fought for the contrary principle. The people are not sovereign and have no right to recall the powers they delegated to their servant, the federal government. That the federal government is sovereign and the people have no right to withdraw, no matter how abusive the federal government might be. Robert Louis Dabney, a Presbyterian minister and soon to be Stonewall's chief of staff, wrote to Reverend S. J. Prime, a Northern friend, on April 20th, 1861, 3 days after Virginia seceded. In his letter, Dabney laid out two main ideas. First, why Southerners were leaving the Union, and second, why the conservative men of the North should side with the South. Starting with Lincoln's call for troops to invade the South, Dabney wrote, "This appeal to arms is as dangerous to your rights as to ours. Let it be carried out, and whatever may have befallen us, it will leave you with consolidated federal government, with state sovereignty extinguished, and with the Constitution in ruins, and with your rights and safety prey to a frightful combination of radicalism and military despotism. If war is thrust upon us, you should be found on our side, contending for the supremacy of law and constitutional safeguards with a courage worthy of the heroes of Saratoga and Trenton. How horrible is this war to be? Who are to fight it out to its bitter issue? Not the tongue-valiant brawlers who have inflamed the feud by their prating lies about the barbarism of slavery. These pitiful miscreants are already hiding their cowardly persons from the storm, and its brunt must be borne by the honest, the misguided, the patriotic men of the North who, in a moment of madness, have been thrust into this false position." Dabney then explains why secession was necessary. "If you in the North do indeed construe the federal compact so that a ruthless majority may perpetrate unconstitutional wrong, may trample on the sacred authority of the Supreme Court, and may pervert all the powers of the federal government, and the minority have no remedy except submission, if you mean that sovereign states, the creators of these federal authorities, are to be the helpless slaves, in the last resort, of their own servant, if you mean that one party is to keep or break the compact as his arrogance, interest, or caprice may dictate, and the other is to be held bound by it at the point of a sword, if you mean that a sovereign state is not to be the judge of its own wrong and its own redress, when all constitutional appeals have failed, then we say, this much lauded federal compact is a monstrous fraud, a horrid trap, and we do well to free ourselves and our children from it, even at the expense of all the horrors of another Revolutionary War. Are we to be held offenders because we attempted peacefully to exercise the last remaining remedy and to pluck our liberties and the principles of this Constitution from the vandal hands which were rending them all by quiet secession? Nay, verily. In the ordinance of 1787, in which Virginia first accepted this Constitution, she expressly reserved to herself the right to sever its bonds, whenever she judged they were used injuriously to her covenanted rights. It was on this condition she was received into the family of states, and her reception on this condition was a concession of it by her partners. From that condition she has never for 1 hour seceded. Shall she be called covenant breaker because she judges that the time has come to exercise her right expressly reserved? But it is said, if the right of secession is allowed, then our government is only a rope of sand. I reply that the government of which Virginia has been a member has always had this condition in it. As to her, for her right to go out of it whenever she judged herself injured by it, was expressly reserved and conceded from the first. When it comes to stealing of the federal forts, Dabney wrote, the South has not seceded because she wished to commit robbery. The only legitimate use the United States could have for the forts within their borders was to protect those states. When we relinquish all claims on that protection, what desire can the federal government have to retain them, save as instruments of oppression? Dabney finished with a bit of advice for his northern friend. If you find that the voice of justice and reason is no longer permitted to be heard in the North, that the friends of the Constitution cannot lift their hands there with safety in its defense, then we invite you and all true men to come to this sunny land and help us here to construct and defend another temple where constitutional liberty may abide secure and untarnished. For you, we have open arms and warm hearts. For our enemies, resistance to the death. Yours in the bonds of the gospel, R. L. Dabney. Dabney's example is useful for us today. He did not curse every northern man simply because of his place of birth. He welcomed, even invited right-thinking northern men to join them in the struggle. We should do likewise. And for carpetbaggers and scalawags, we should maintain a firm resistance. And when they repent, welcome their repentance. Here's a bit of what Confederates said during the war about what they were fighting for. At a meeting of the Stanton Artillery near Fishersville on February 1st, 1865, the soldiers declared, quote, we are fighting for our liberty. We are determined never to acquiesce in any accommodation short of the independence of our Confederacy. We will never consent to any peace which does not assure our independence and liberty. We pledge to stand by the glorious South till the last man has shed his last drop of blood. On the same day, the 31st Virginia Infantry declared, we took up arms to achieve our independence, and 4 years of hardships and privations, as well as the blood of our slaughtered comrades, demand that we shall lay them down only when that purpose is accomplished. The next day, the 52nd Virginia declared, the Southern states never bound themselves to a permanent union. The war to make it such is unjust, and we have as good a right to be free and to govern ourselves as our enemies have, and that we will not accept any terms short of independence. A valorous zeal and steady adherence to the determination to conquer will reward us with an honorable peace. With an inflexible resolution to be free, subjugation is impossible. If we are conquered, it will not be by the stern valor of our foes, but by a want of firmness and determination in ourselves. We acknowledge the hand of Providence in our past successes, and we trust in the righteousness of our cause and in the justice of our God, and lean upon His strong arm for deliverance. On February 16, 1865, the NCOs and soldiers of the 5th Virginia Infantry of the Stonewall Brigade declared, quote, we pledge ourselves to follow our illustrious chieftain Robert E. Lee until the last one of our foes are driven from our beloved soil, or until we shall find a soldier's grave. Independence and self-government, that was what the Confederates said over and over they were fighting for. We should still honor those ideals. So what kind of soldiers served in the Confederate cause? I would like to share a few anecdotes to illustrate their character. At a crisis in the Battle of Cedar Mountain in 1862, Captain John Brown, a 62-year-old Georgian in the 12th Georgia Infantry, told Jubal Early, quote, "General, my ammunition is nearly out. Don't you think we had better charge them?" Unquote. Now, being nearly out of ammunition normally meant retreat because soldiers without ammunition could not shoot back. Not the stalwart old Georgian. Being out of ammunition impelled him to think of attacking. Jubal Early was impressed by his courage, and we should be as well. At the Battle of the Crater in 1864, as Saunders' Alabama Brigade was preparing to counterattack, a South Carolina soldier covered with dirt and powder came up to Captain James C. Featherston. "Captain," he said, "can I go into this charge with you?" "Yes," said Featherston. "Who are you?" He said he belonged to one of the South Carolina regiments that had been blown up. "I want to get even with them," he said. Featherston answered, "How high did they blow you?" "I don't know," the man replied, "but as I was going up, I met the company commissary officer coming down, and he said, 'I will try to have breakfast ready by the time you get down.'" Confederate soldiers, especially late in the war, were always hungry. In the autumn of 1864, David Cardwell said, quote, "I was so hungry that I thanked God I had a backbone for my stomach to lean up against." Late in 1864, one black man in the Army of Northern Virginia presented himself at Lee's headquarters at Edge Hill. "General Lee," the man began, "I've been wanting to see you for a long time. I's a soldier." "Ah," Lee answered, "to what army do you belong? To the Union Army or to the Southern Army?" "Oh, General," the man replied, "I belong to your army." "Well," Lee inquired, "have you been shot?" "No, sah, I ain't been shot yet," the man said. "How is that?" Lee inquired. "Nearly all of our men get shot." "Why, General, I ain't been shot because I stays back where the generals stay." Lee found this response so humorous he repeated it to his officers for some time thereafter. When General John B. Gordon formed his last line of battle at Appomattox, one man took his place in the ranks with both arms so badly wounded he could not carry a gun. "What are you doing here?" an officer demanded. "You can't fight." The soldier answered, "I know I can't, but I can still yell." I cannot close this section without a reference to the Confederate women. The work they did and the support they rendered is impossible to tally. Phoebe Yates Pember, whose book A Southern Woman's Story I recommend, ran a Richmond hospital. She wrote, quote, "The women of the South had been openly and violently rebellious from the moment they thought their states' rights touched. They incited the men to struggle in support of their views, and whether right or wrong, sustained them nobly to the end." When we honor Confederate history and heritage, we honor service, self-sacrifice, courage, and commitment. These virtues are still in need today. Thus, Confederate History Month has two main functions. First, it honors the service and sacrifice of brave men and women, and second, it instructs future generations about their ancestors' virtues, so hopefully the next generation can emulate them. The South Carolina Confederate Monument on the State House grounds in Columbia illustrates this. It bears this inscription: "Let the stranger who may in the future times read this inscription recognize that these were men whom power could not corrupt, whom death could not terrify, whom defeat could not dishonor, and let their virtues plead for just judgment of the cause in which they perished. Let the South Carolinian of another generation remember that the state taught them how to live and how to die, and from her broken fortunes she has preserved for her children the priceless treasure of their memories, teaching all who may claim the same birthright that truth, courage, and patriotism endure forever." At the end of the film, Saving Private Ryan, Captain Miller lies on the ground mortally wounded. He looks up at Ryan and says, "Earn this." Confederate veterans from Oakwood and Hollywood cemeteries, from the Stonewall Cemetery in Lexington and Thorn Rose Cemetery in Stanton, from Camp Chase and Point Lookout, and from thousands of unmarked graves across the Southland, challenge us in the same way. Earn this. I leave you with the words of Confederate veteran John Cussons. A wise and philosophical historian has justly said that a people which takes no pride in the noble achievements of a remote ancestry will never achieve anything worthy to be remembered by remote descendants. So this Confederate History Month, let us honor those who came before us, and let their service inspire us to serve the South with the same tenacity they did.